Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Rafael Behr. I'm a columnist for The Guardian, and that's as much as you need to know about me. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to Policy Exchange for hosting us. Thank you very much to Legal in General for facilitating, I believe. It's a brilliant topic, which is why we've got a lovely full room, because in policy terms in the last year or two, also, let's go back a bit further, everyone's been saying for a long time that at some stage the shortage of housing would become one of the more salient issues in politics, and it didn't happen, and it didn't happen for ages, and those of us were saying it would happen. We're starting to get kind of surprised and worried that it wasn't happening, and finally it has happened, and we have woken up. Politics, Westminster has woken up to the fact that there is a housing crisis and a shortage of affordable homes, and everyone can agree on two things: that we need more of them, and everyone can even agree on where they should be built. Everyone can agree they should be built somewhere else. So there's complete consensus on that. When you drill into that, however, the consensus starts to unravel a little bit, which is why the idea of new garden cities has a certain attraction, or not, as I suppose we're about to find out. You've definitely heard enough from me. Because I am fundamentally inadequate in my capabilities as a chair, apart from to take questions later on, I'm going to get the panel to sell their credentials to you themselves. I think we'll stick with the usual format, which is everyone speaks for 5-10 minutes. If they go on too long, I'll sort of stare at them very hard and make them stop, and then we'll have lots of time for questions, which will be very brief. And I propose the following bargain: if the audience promises to ask very brief questions, the panel offers to give very succinct and precise answers. I believe we're going to start with Richard Blakeway, Deputy Mayor for Housing and London Property on the Greater London Authority. Is that right?
Perfect. Well, absolutely.
Actually, as Chair, I can tell you that is right.
No. And as the person, I can confirm it's right. I'll second that. Look, great to see you. There's a really important date next year, and it's not the general election. This date is a Tuesday, and it's the 6th of January. And apparently, this is the date someone has worked out when London's population will be the highest it's ever been. And 8.6 million. And overall, this is fantastic news. It's fantastic economically, culturally, socially, but it presents us big challenges. Now, one of the key debates is, can London contain that growth? Or does that growth need to spread beyond the boundaries of London? I won't delve too much into the discussion on garden cities, not least because you've got David, who judged the Wolfson Prize, so I can't think of anyone more qualified to talk about that within our allotted 5 minutes. All I will say is that the proposals that were submitted to Wolfson, obviously closely overseen, I guess, by Policy Exchange, were, incredibly sensitive, intelligent, thought-provoking, thought about design, thought about community engagement and so forth, and I think there's an enormous amount of merit in what was in some of the ideas which were explored. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that London itself has enormous potential to stimulate more development. We have enough land to double house building in the capital. This is. If you then look at the 200 town centres that exist around London, you have a fantastic opportunity there to rejuvenate and regenerate those town centres with different, maybe less retail and more residential, higher quality retail, but fantastic transport links, transport nodes for the techies and so on. And I think this is this potential for urban renaissance is hugely untapped within the capital. But there's kind of three areas that I'll just touch on that we need to focus on. The first is the role of public policy. You're right to say that housing is now Westminster, if you like, has woken up to housing. But the reality is we don't have a kind of housing service in the same way that we have a health service or education. And actually, the way in which public policy works, compared to those other big political issues, is very, very different. And you're looking for the sector itself, the market, to respond and to lead the development of the homes that we need. So public policy is largely enabling rather than delivering a service. Now there's some exceptions to that, the role of public money, the role of local authorities, the role of land and so on. But fundamentally you're looking for the sector to respond. And I think some of the big changes which have happened in public policy over many, many decades, the liberalisation around mortgages, the role of housing associations and so on, I think it's still bedding down. And not all of those changes in public policy have been optimised. There are, and we do need to look at how our industry responds to public policy. We need to look at the role that industry can play in meeting that housing challenge. Because it's a housing challenge that hasn't happened overnight, but it's been with us for at least 30 years. And I think the problem that we've got is that we haven't necessarily an industry that's designed to double house building. And so there are some fundamental things we need to look at there, as well as looking at the role of public policy and planning and so on. And I think it's an important point that needs to be explored further. The second is what product we're building. And I think for too long there was product was very polarised. It was market sale, and that may be bought by an investor, or it may be bought by an owner-occupier. It was traditional affordable housing. And actually, it's the products we need to sustain a city and meet population growth like London are far more complex than that. And that's why the role of purpose rent, which I know Nigel and Energy are interested in, as well as David, the role of shared ownership. There is a much broader product offer that we can have, which actually helps meet the much broader range of incomes that we need to for a city like London to be a success. So I think we need to think about the type of product we're building. And then the final thing is, I'll just touch on, is the fiscal settlement that we have to help support house building. And this partly links to cities and the role of cities. Our polity is clearly very centralised compared to other places. So you compare the freedoms that London, or indeed some of the big northern cities, have compared to counterparts in America or on the continent, we're really restricted. And it makes, and I'm sure, talk to anyone in the industry and they say we need long-term certainty, we need long-term planning around infrastructure and so forth, all of which are very relevant to housing. Actually, the ability for city government to do that is quite constrained when 96% of the funding that London invests is wholly dependent on a negotiation with government. And so I do think we need to think about the settlement for cities, which also leads us into the relationship between housing and taxation as well, and the role of stamp duty and so on. I'll try and leave my comments there, so I think I'm well within 3 minutes, 5 minutes even. But just to re-emphasise the potential to stimulate growth in London is enormous. And the capacity is clearly identified with the support of new transport infrastructure. But we need to recognise that the industry itself has to change, and the type of players that we have in it need to change. We also need to think about how we unlock all parts of London to development, and not just the handful that currently contribute most to London's housing supply.
Thank you very much. Double thanks there. First of all, for sticking to your allotted time, and second, for introducing us to not all changes in public policy have been optimised, which sounds to me that someone is not optimising their changes in public policy, and we should make it our business in this event to find out who they are, name them and shame them. With a view to that, Dr. Nigel Wilson, Group Chief Executive, Legal and General.
Thank you. I think the time for mourning and groaning is over, and we need to move to an era of doing. And I'm thrilled to be on the stage with Rick and David, who've just been outstanding doers. If we want to change things, we have to be the we that make things happen, and that's beginning to happen. I think the first comment is a sort of a macro comment. The world is awash with money. Politicians, media have been obsessed about bankers and the fact that bankers are not doing this, bankers are not lending that. That is absolutely and totally wrong. We don't have a supply of credit problem, we have a demand for credit problem. You know, the constraint in London is getting the land, it's not about getting the money. The money is there in huge amounts. Never before in the world have we seen so much money with so few places to go, hence the price of assets have just been bid up continually all the time. Look how low interest rates interest are. Stop blaming the banks, let's get on with making things happen. Economic growth, as Rick was saying, is just driven by urban cities. Urban regeneration on a huge scale should be happening in the UK. London has just done a fantastic job. The job of the rest of the cities has been mediocre to poor at best. They're all Championship League teams, probably in the lower half of the Championship. We need more investments in the UK. We've had chronic underinvestments in housing, in education, in infrastructure, in urban regeneration. The money exists to make all of this change. We just don't have the political will or the political leadership to make that happen. We have isolated leaders across the country, two of which are on the table with me. And people in the UK are not seeing real wages increase. They're not seeing real wages increase because of the chronic underinvestment for the last 20 to 30 years. We've got 3% GDP growth, but none of that is real wage growth. That's why everybody feels crap. You know, whether I go to Darlington, to Newcastle, to Burnley, Bradford, Barnsley, doesn't matter where I go. Nobody's seeing real wages grow. And that's because of an underinvestment. Every town, every city I pretty much go to is not overbuilt, including London. London's only got half the density of Paris. They're under-demolished. We need to knock down huge parts of our existing cities. They're just not up to scratch and build stuff. Whether that's London, Tottenham, Southwark, Clapham, it sort of doesn't matter. Manchester, Newcastle, Birmingham, there's just huge areas that need redeveloping. And we need to be using slow money. What is slow money? We provided David for his business 50-year financing. That's 5-0 financing. The world operated on fast money, which created huge volatility. That was driven by bank lending, which is inherently unstable. Bank lending is not designed for lending for these types of projects. You need 20, 30, 40 or 50-year money. We've invested about 4 billion so far in the UK. We'd very much like to invest 15 billion. All that's constraining us is the supply of projects from people to us. And it's not just us who can provide that supply, our family and friends. We have 3,200 pension clients and sovereign wealth funds as clients. That includes people like Knoll, PGGM, ADIA, SAVE, GIC, CIC, all these huge funds around the world. They all look upon the UK as a great place to invest. At the moment, they're only basically interested in London, and they're interested in London because of the political leadership. And that's not Boris, that's the people who work for Boris. Boris somehow has managed to put together an outstanding team of people who are really making things happen. We are supporters of the Garden City. We entered the Wolfson competition along with our partners, Shelter. Sadly, we came second. I thought undeserved as it turned out.
Absolutely.
I think the people who won cheated actually. But you know, we all know that that housing is unaffordable. We all know and I can identify the problem. Even the politicians identify the problem right now. The politicians themselves haven't got any money. The government has £100 billion deficit, so we shouldn't be looking for them to provide the capital to make things happen. We're huge fans of devolution because we think devolution will lead to better political leadership within towns, within cities, and within regions. And we've just got to get on with that. Indeed, I think the Treasury supports that. I think John Osborne. We handed out a little brochure for you all to see, which goes through in a bit more detail some of the points that I'm making here. But from a standing start, Legal & General has put together a programme of 25,000 houses to build. We didn't have any 18 months ago. And if we as one institution can do it, many other institutions can do it and make it happen. That includes areas like student accommodation, where we financed 17,000 beds already, at a cost of 1.2 billion here in the UK. We have our English Cities Fund, which is helping the regeneration of Salford, Plymouth, Canning Town, Liverpool, Wakefield. And indeed, we're heavily involved in Northampton, Birmingham, Bracknell, because all of these areas are so underdeveloped. If you walk around these things, they're shocking. I mean, when you look at the modern cities of the world, And sadly, most of those modern cities are in Asia now. If a man came down from Mars and you had to guess which cities were in the modern Western industrialized world, you wouldn't guess by looking at the cities today. You'd figure all of those cities were in Asia. They've got political leadership. They're really making things happen. We've got to catch up. They've built 50 airports in China, whilst we've been debating 100 at Heathrow. It's a shocking indictment. Now, I was involved in that debate 25 years ago. 25 years ago. I felt as though I never left the pitch when I came back into the debate very recently. So, I've been one of the privileged in this country. My housing today has cost me nothing. I paid a trivial amount in mortgage payments many, many years ago. I paid off my mortgage a long time ago. I made a huge capital gain on my housing, tax-free. It's a massive intergenerational unfairness. And I totally agree that the one bit of consensus is we all want more housing, but we don't want it built here. And our generation has got to stop being so selfish and depriving younger people in our communities, in the economy, from what should be their right to have affordable housing. I had it with the visionary people who led to the building of the Newton Air Cliffs, the Peterlees, in the northeast of England. Sadly, we've seen very little of that happen in the last 20 years. We need much more of that going forward. But we can't rely on the government. It's not about government money. It's not about government guarantees. It's all about us. We have to be the we that make it happen. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. In terms of constrained supply, there are actually 2 seats at the front here, so we can...
They're right beside one of my colleagues, actually,
yeah.
So this says something about his popularity.
People are welcome to come and sit. It's not like stand-up comedy. We won't be rude about you if you sit near the front, but there aren't actually any more seats, but there's more space. You can sit on the floor, but anyway, enough of that. David Cowans, CEO, Places for People.
I'm next. Yes, I was one of the judges for the Wilson Prize. Just get that out of the way straight away. So if you didn't like the winner, I'll see you afterwards. Can I just link this debate about garden cities to the wider economy? Because the exam question for this session is, are garden cities the key to delivering economic growth and the homes we need? No. Go now. No. They're one of and an important part of the way we introduce growth. And one of the important things is the way in which cities throughout the history of humankind have been massive growths of economic growth. Wherever they are in the world, they're huge growers of economic activity. They're hubs of intelligent thinking, of connections, of networks, and most of the economic growth in the world will come, as already it does, from cities. Secondly, we have a new economy. We talk about knowledge economy. It's what's inside people's heads. And also a very global economy. So if we fail our young people, because that's what really this is about, how do they get their first home? And if the answer is they can't, then they will seek that opportunity somewhere else. So it won't be that people who want to open a business in Silicon Roundabout will want to go to Hertfordshire. They'll go to Berlin. Because why wouldn't you? And housing in Berlin is miles cheaper than it is here. It's bigger. And there's already some examples of where very powerful economic activities are starting to shift elsewhere. Now, I don't want to overplay that. It's not huge. But we ignore that trend at our peril. And one of the big things that I think garden cities could provide is a mechanism, a framework for creating campus-type new towns, where you capture real intellectual talent, where you get, as you do in many US places, companies not create company towns, but do create places that gather together intellectual might in one place, and that they then make that place attractive. So the education quality for kids, the spatial quality, the environmental quality is all focused around not a housing, but about making that place economically powerful. And that's an issue we've got to deal with. Secondly, just pick up this point about housing supply. I mean, the statistics are boring, they're very long run, they have, I agree with both Rick and Nigel, this is a 30-40 year problem. It hasn't just appeared last Friday and it won't be solved next Friday, and essentially it isn't just a housing issue, it is an infrastructure and economic issue. And if we want to sustain our economic growth, we're going to have to tackle it. If we choose not to and see it only as a narrow housing problem, then our economic growth will probably suffer over time. We will fall behind very dynamic economies who are tackling these issues, providing good quality places for their workers. They will attract scarce talent, and we won't. It's that deep for me, it's that important. And we make a big error, I think, in constraining into a very narrow housing planning debate, which isn't the point at all. That's the symptom, not the real problem. We have a huge growth in elderly people in this country. Does anybody know what percentage of elderly people in the United States live in retirement housing? Guess.
50.
It's 6. Anybody know how many in the UK?
1.
Includes care homes, retirement villages, everything.
1.
It's 0.5%, right? And yet we keep going on about people downsizing and shit. Well, they won't, will they? Why the hell would they? They've got nowhere to go. So we've got to find a way of using this framework, and it is only that, to create solutions to lots of problems. Where do young people go? How do we keep our intellectual talent? How do we grow our economy? What do we do with our old people? There's a lot of issues in here, and it's a mistake to see it as a numerical problem only. It's a qualitative problem as well. So we all agree we need more properties, we need better qualities. We all agree that largely they should be built on brownfield land. I don't disagree with that at all. If we stick with 60%, I'll be very happy. What about the other 40% then, which by definition can't be brownfield, so what must it be then? Anybody dare mention the G word? It's got to be greenfield if it's not brownfield, and we can't build 100% on brownfield, despite what a lot of people say. There's a huge argument for the regeneration of high streets, a completely different move in retail markets, where the internet has completely changed our shopping habits and will continue to do it in ways we can't even imagine, and yet our shopping centres and our high streets were constructed for the turn of the century. We've got to find a new way of operating these places, a residential offer. I can imagine lots of elderly type retirement villages in town centres. You can see how all that would work, but it needs a radical new shift in our thinking. And a Garden City methodology would create a framework to help that sort of proposition. The other big word I want to use is the I word, infrastructure. There was a session in here before about infrastructure. Most people who are NIMBYs, in my view, are NIMBYs because they don't believe the infrastructure will follow their housing. They feel cynical because they think their roads will be overstretched, their hospitals will be full, their kids won't get into a school, and they have a very good point. So I acknowledge that actually. It's really crucial that we acknowledge that not everybody is NIMBY just because they are anti-development. They're not. They're anti their way of life being worse than it is now. And that's nearly always an infrastructure point. So one of the key things I agree with Nigel about is we must therefore develop real places. I work for an organisation called Place for People. It does what it says on the tin. It does all places, everything. And we are absolutely dedicated to the idea of a new way of developing places that aren't just about housing at all. They actually start with the infrastructure. So we've done a big scheme in Milton Keynes. First thing we did with the local authority, we built a school before we built a single house. And this is the new way of doing things. And to do that, we need a new tripartite relationship between central government, local government and developers. All of us have to change because the fundamental nonsense, if anybody thinks we're going to achieve twice the number of housing production in the UK by doing exactly what we've done for the last 30 years, they must be absolutely insane. So that isn't going to happen. And every year for the last 20 years, broadly speaking, we've built half the properties we need. So the problem gets worse every year. And if we don't tackle this, the new politics of young people getting fed up with that might be very interesting indeed. Next big issue for me is the land word. Not only do we need lots of it, but we need it in a way that actually allows value capture to provide that infrastructure. Because I would argue the state cannot afford, and will probably never be able to afford, to do all the infrastructure required. And one of the good things about the Wolfson Prize, not least that Lord Wolfson funded it, which is an amazing piece of philanthropy, driving this issue back to the centre stage, was the idea that actually a garden city didn't have to be built in the middle of a field somewhere. It could actually be a framework which could work in an existing town. And the idea, the model that was taken was Edinburgh, which had its old medieval town and a Georgian new town, still called a new town to this day. What is wrong with a framework of building on the existing infrastructure and infilling around existing cities to make the best use of that, make those attractive for our economy, drive growth, and use some low quality greenbelt in the process? And I quite like the recent Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors idea of an amber belt, that is low grade greenbelt, because not every piece of greenbelt is some verdant field. A lot of it is pretty poor quality. Some of it's used for pretty unpleasant activities, and the biodiversity that's claimed for it is a nonsense. And what we then end up with a pile of unintended consequences, like school playing fields being built on because you've got nowhere else to go. The urban area, how does it build? Sure, it can densify, completely agree with that. There is no one solution, there are many, and I think garden cities is a key one within that. Next issue for me is the idea of place. We've got to create new forms of development which also focuses on civic leadership and management of those places. Many of us, I've seen it myself, have seen really good attempts at master planning, really good construction, and the place just falls into pretty poor usage later on because there's no management. And I'm not suggesting heavy state management, I'm suggesting private sector management of the type that we provide. And my last point is about finance. Nigel's right, there is an absolute wall of money, but it wants clever ideas. It doesn't want to just invest in things that don't work. And the next real issue for me is the other thing that convinces NIMBYs is they believe that developers are going to be around for a while. What they don't trust is no infrastructure and somebody's going to build it, sell it and go. So we need an infrastructure focus, a real process of involving young people who want to live in that development to get to actually engage with it. We might actually see a renaissance in local government if we did that, who knows. And also a belief that the infrastructure for the supply chain, which is what I try and do and spend 15 years doing, takes a master planned site right through to management and manages the whole thing. Infrastructure has a deal where for every hectare of greenbelt it gives another hectare of public open space back. So there's a real deal about the management of that place in the long term. If we're able to do all these things, and you see garden cities in the context of a jigsaw with a lot of pieces, then I think we could safeguard and even grow our economies further, and more importantly, get ourselves in a situation where we are delivering for our young people and their children today. That's my bit.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I've been coming to party conferences for many years, all different parties. I think that's the first time that at a Conservative Party conference I've had the combination of someone from the platform calling for building on the green belt, and I haven't actually heard the sharp intake of breath in the hall. So something is definitely changing in politics. Perhaps next time we might even hear it from a minister. But moving on swiftly, Chris Walker, Head of Housing, Planning and Urban Policy here at Policy Exchange.
Thank you. Look, new garden cities and settlements are not the whole answer to the country's housing shortage, but they could be a really big part. But it's not just about numbers, it's also about changing the terms of the debates so that people are a lot more positive in their thinking towards new development. It's also worth remembering that the original idea of the Green Belt, conceived by the planners, was actually to allow for new developments and settlements as a quid pro quo for that arrangement, including development in the Green Belt. Most people recognise that we need to build more housing. In a populace poll commissioned by the Wolfson Economics Prize, 72% of people agreed that there's a serious shortage of housing in the country. Over the last decade, we've built around 135,000 homes a year on average, yet we need to be building closer to 235,000 to meet future demand. It's a shortage of 100,000 a year on average. Now, it's all too easy to blame the NIMBYs for our housing woes. Unfortunately, NIMBYism is often well-founded. Given the often poor quality architectural design of new homes, lack of attention given to place, a lack of new infrastructure for them, which places ever more pressure on existing local roads and schools. Many homeowners object to new development on their doorstep, sequential development, because they believe it will reduce the value of their home. They believe that it will adversely affect the outlook from their front room window. They will rightly object as a result. They may not be entitled to their view, but they sure as hell will have paid for it. All of these things are negative impacts of sequential development, and they give rise to local opposition, which is why new development can be and can prove so toxic in local politics. Garden cities move us fundamentally away from these problems. New development done in this way does not impact on people's homes and lives. That's why garden cities are game-changing, I believe. That is why we shouldn't be surprised that people not only back new garden cities, but that existing homeowners back them even more. Polling for the Wolfson Economic Prize tells us that people support garden cities provided it is not in their backyard. In the same polling, in the same Wolfson polling, 74% of people agreed that it's a good idea to build new garden cities. 79% of the over 65s agreed that it's a good idea. So the older the respondent, almost the greater the support, which is a really interesting finding, I thought. The other crucial thing about garden cities is that you can build them on agricultural land, instead of the optioned land that often surrounds our urban areas. Because land for housing is so scarce, the land value uplift can be absolutely massive. So in a high demand area, the price of a land permissioned for housing can be 20 times higher than the price of land for a farm. That's just an incredible uplift, and it just underscores the fact that land is scarce as reflected by its huge price. Sorry, land for housing is scarce as reflected by its price. And that uplift can be captured, it can be used to pay for the upfront infrastructure for the cities. And it can be used to compensate the existing landowners, the existing farmers, so they can go and buy a better farm elsewhere. It's also worth remembering too that garden cities in the past, take Letchworth, didn't receive a penny of public money. It can all be done with that private money and that uplift that I've just spoken about. And the Economics Prize winner showed how this could be viable. So again, no one is saying that garden cities will get us to 250, 300,000 houses a year, but as well as making a significant contribution to the numbers, they will also help change the way we think about and deliver new housing in our country, moving us away from fearing the next mock Tudor housing estate near to where we live, to being inspired by entirely new, self-contained settlements that are well designed, that are visionary, and that don't impact negatively on people's lives.
Gosh, thank you very much. Well, that was exemplary succinctness and brevity from the panel there, which will now be matched by comments and questions from the floor, and then we'll get into a sort of an arms race of who can be more brief and succinct. I'll take a brace of questions. Let's start with this lady waving enthusiastically, followed by the lady who had her hand back there. Yes, just put it back up there, and then this gentleman on the left there.
Hello.
Also, please say who you are as well, and then ask a question.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Sudworth from Peabody, and we're a housing association that many of you will know in London with around 27,000 homes, and we're just embarking on a very exciting programme of regeneration in an area called Thamesmead in southeast London, which we think over the long term has the potential to provide many thousands of new homes and new jobs, very much along the lines of the model that David was outlining of a new community, of a regenerated community within an existing urban area, which obviously avoids many of the issues around the greenfield development that the panel were talking about. It was picking up on one of Nigel's points, actually. Peabody last year issued a 40-year bond. We understand as well that we need slow money to do some of the regeneration that we're talking about that takes place over many decades. And it was a question really about what is the missing link? If the money is there, if we are indeed awash with cash, what's the missing link? What can housing associations and other developers do to put together the sorts of packages that will draw in that investment?
Thank you very much. And there was the lady on the left-hand side, who's now seems to have gone. Where did she go? Yes, there she is. She's back.
I was just going to...
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sorry, my name's Heather. I'm from Inside Housing magazine. I was just going to ask about a couple of the policy announcements that have been announced over the weekend. One of them was the 100,000 new homes for people at discounted rents, younger people at discounted rents. And I was just going to ask
Don't be put off, that's sabotage, ignore it, write it out.
I was just going to ask Blakeway, I mean, a certain percentage of the homes that you intend to build are for affordable rent. How would you feel about the government wanting to build these type of homes which have, freedom from affordable housing requirements? How would you feel about them, about building them in London?
And then there was a gentleman in the blue shirt who's got his hand back up now, helpfully.
Phil Clark, Orpington. I've agreed with a lot of what the panel has said. I have children who are almost of the age that need homes. I also have elderly parents who are at that stage in their life where really they need to move down a couple of places. So I do agree that a lot of building is necessary. I also agree that David is absolutely right that infrastructure is the key to major developments and vastly increases the acceptability of them. However, I do note that at least two members of the panel were slightly emotional in the way they described this. Hey, let's build for the kids, and that's great. But how about trying to sell me the argument, hey, let's concrete over the green belt for the Romanians? Because the numbers of immigrants which are driving this is actually a big problem. And if we end up leaving the European Union in 2.5 years' time, then maybe we don't need all these houses, or maybe we can keep the green belt.
Thank you very much. Right, let's go back to the panel. Nigel, do you want to address the missing link, and then maybe Richard, you could respond specifically to the point about the new homes announcement and how that would work in London, and then the panel can, or feel free to add to any other bits as well, but we'll start that way.
Yeah, I mean, the missing link is political leadership and small money. That's the positive contribution that we want to make. There is huge amounts of pension money around the world, and it doesn't want to invest to make short-term equity returns. We're moving from a fast money era to a slow money era. If political leaders want to do this stuff, they can do it. They can do it. The money's there to do it. The money's there to put the infrastructure in up front, because if you're looking at a 20, 30, 40-year types of financing, putting the infrastructure into that cocktail is relatively easy to do. It's all been financed today, or so too much of it is financed by bank financing, which is very short term, 3, 4, 5-year types of financing. It's really difficult to put infrastructure financing in a 2, 3, 4-year type of package. The sorts of returns that are required for that, and the immediacy of it make it technically very difficult to do. So just, in some ways, it's just really simple, and David will make great examples of this. You can put the infrastructure in, it's relatively easy to finance, and we just need political leadership to make it happen, or leadership of any kind to make these things happen.
Richard?
Yeah, I mean, just two quick points. So first, to just pick up on this question about slow money, and then secondly, to address the specific question about affordable housing. I think there's another bit missing, and I do think it's the complexion of the development industry as well. Because a lot of developers want a lean balance sheet. They don't intend to spend an enormous amount of time in a place once they build the development and so on. And I do think for this idea of more patient capital coming into the market, which is absolutely right, and needs to be part of a very different development industry than the one we had before the crash. You do need different types of players there as well. Housing associations clearly can play a role here, but one of the things I was saying, about not being optimised or whatever the phrase was I used. I mean, since the '88 Housing Act, have all housing associations really worked out whether they're going to develop or not? if surpluses have gone up and produced a record in the last 3 consecutive years, but not all associations have a major development programme, isn't there a kind of question there about are they using those new freedoms and powers there? Another really interesting opportunity as well, which I think links to the slow money, is about how you plan a place. The potential for, wouldn't it be wonderful if a local authority that's democratically elected goes in and plans a big area, splits up the plots and brings in a few development partners, that those homes are built and are of a great quality of beauty that people support, that the infrastructure is put in and it's properly planned, and that actually a lot of the planning risk that developers see is removed because all that planning is done up front. That sounds like a great idea. The powers to do that have been on the statute for 10 years. It's never once been used. It's a local development order. Never once been used in a residential context. So there are opportunities, I think, to do things slightly differently, which will attract more long-term placemaking and slow money that's talked about. Very, very brief answer on the announcements over the weekend. I mean, clearly we need to see more of the detail, and that's obviously subject to what happens at the general election in the next Parliament. I don't think I can really comment further.
And what about, there are quite a lot of first-generation migrants in London. Are they part of the problem?
Well, I mean, I think firstly we need to recognise that this is a huge housing backlog of unbuilt homes, and we should get away from the fact that there's been a 30-year failure here to build enough homes, and also reflect on the fact that the demographics and the growth in London is far more complex than kind of pointing your finger at a certain group of people and saying that that's the cause of the problem. It's slightly unfair to isolate.
David, yeah, feel free to add to as much or as little as that.
Just on the issue about the finance, I mean, the reality is it isn't long-term or short-term money, it's both. And not only is there a need to change the development industry in terms of what it can do, but also for it to become a nexus between the capital markets generally and the asset production in the first place. So you will get some investors who don't like planning risk, you'll get others who do. You get some people who want a higher return for that position, and some people who want long-term position. And it's primarily, the job I'm interested in doing is to create that supply chain, no matter how big or how small, from strategic land right through to management. We'll do it, and we'll put together the funding means and the mix of the funding required to deliver the project. What's really interesting is that also institutional finance who might take some of that off the balance sheet and might do some institutional renting, because we need a lot more of that. We're one of the few OECD countries that don't have any institutional private rented sector at all, and a lot of those kids are going to rent. But who's building for rent? Well, I can tell you, virtually nobody. So it's not just a simple thing about the quality of the money, the quality of the development. It's also being very, very, very focused on the market, because housing is one of the few pieces of the economy where nobody sees it as a consumer good. It's crazy, really. You buy a car, it's completely different. There must be about 30 different ways to buy a car. Try and buy a house one way and you can rent. Well, that's not really what the 21st century is about, is it? People expect a lot more options than that. So we have to come up with new consumeristic ways to allow people to access that housing. And there's a lot needs to change. And I think we're up for the challenge. I do get emotional about it because I think it needs to happen quickly, is my straight view. And I think there's a lot of people who need that housing to make their lives better. And that bothers me.
Chris.
Thanks. I'll just respond on the points about the immigration and the concreting over the countryside. I think it's quite interesting just to think about what is driving the future household growth. Now, the government thinks that we need to be building about 230,000 homes going forward. Now, only a quarter, perhaps a third of that is actually being driven by migration. The rest is actually being driven by internal population growth, including important demographic factors. So, for example, we've got more people living on their own, and that's a choice. That's a lifestyle choice. And we've also got more older people, of course, and naturally more older people tend to live, either just cohabiting or on their own as well. So it's really, really important to recognise what the drivers of the future growth is. And as Rick said, there is a really big legacy issue as well, because we've not been building enough houses for a generation now. Not in any year since 1980 have we built enough houses to meet demand. On the concreting over the countryside, only 9% of land in this country is actually built on, and even that includes back gardens. So if we're going to build 300 or 250,000 houses a year, it's absolutely not going to be about concrete or concreting over the countryside.
Great, thank you. Let's take another brace of questions, lots of questions. Okay, well I did, this gentleman in the third row there, Colman, and the gentleman with the Union flag socks here, and then let's have the lady who I'm sort of pointing at there with the black hair. All right. Oh, we've got a microphone. Okay, go on then. You grab like you go for it.
Volunteer.
Okay.
Dilly Bradley, Taunton Dean, ex-district councillor. There's a question that interests me, what I call the threshold argument or the critical mass argument. You're talking about self-contained settlement. What is the minimum number of people or houses that you need to make that function? From Taunton Dean's point of view, it's got a population in and around it of the town of about 60,000. Now, to get the right kind of economy going, how many people do you need to live in about a 500-metre radius of the centre to keep people living there, not just people in shelter accommodation, they go to after 5 p.m. So it is, and again, when it's infrastructure, there's a step change. When 10,000 people, one sort of sewage plant will do, up it to 50, you will have a totally new build.
Thank you, very excellent question. Why don't we go straight to this lady here, because she's nearest, and then we'll bring, so that's the one, yes.
Hi, I'm Jane Harris from the charity Leonard Cheshire Disability. I wanted to ask a question about the Wolfson Prize, because the runner-up, which we thought was excellent, actually made some commitments to building lifetime homes, to all of the homes being lifetime homes, which means that they're easy to adapt if you become disabled. The walls are strong enough that you can put in grab rails, you can put in stair lifts, you don't have to suddenly move out just because you've had an accident or because you get arthritis, whatever it is you get. But the winner didn't make any of those commitments. And the other thing that the runner-up did was it said that 10% of it would be fully wheelchair accessible, which has been the policy for new builds in London as well for the last decade under both Boris and Ken. It's probably the only thing that Ken and Boris both agree on. So what I wanted to ask was, should that not be a minimum standard for all garden cities if we're really trying to build homes for the future for an ageing population where more and more disabled people live longer lives?
Great, thank you. And let's go straight to Union flag socks. Yeah, I'm pretty confident that's not your name, by the way.
Hi, my name's Ned Brown from the Edinburgh Conservative Association. I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to answer the lady's question, the missing link. I did an FI request for all 32 councils in Scotland, and what came back was 70% of people in social housing in Scotland are on housing benefits. And I did some rough calculations, and basically, from the Treasury perspective, they have to put up the capital to build social housing, and they have to put up they have to spend more money on housing benefits to pay the rent. So from a Treasury perspective, all you do is keeping debt upon debt upon debt. And I did some rough calculations over a 40-year life expectancy for social housing, and from what I could see, the capital is never repaid over the 40-year lifetime. So I think that's one of the problems in social housing, certainly.
Okay,
the question I'd like to ask the panel is... the question I'd like to ask the panel is the disconnect between supply and demand in the housing market in terms of 40% of households in the UK are lone persons, single persons, and only about 8% of housing stock is for one-bedroom accommodation. Is that going to be addressed at any point at all?
Thank you. And then it was in the third row here, gentlemen.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Moss. I'm a councillor in Waltham Forest, chartered surveyor by profession, property developer by trade, and part of Create Streets. Garden cities can be very popular if they're designed well, as can urban extensions, as can redeveloped council estates. Where developers propose massive tall towers and big blocky buildings, they're not very popular. We've just helped the local association in Mount Pleasant put forward an alternate design for that scheme, and we got 30% more homes by adopting a London-style 6-7 story circus-type development. So you can build more homes if you get the design right. So it's just really a point. My question really is, do we need the sort of privatisation and consolidation of housing associations that they undertook in Holland a few years ago to create bigger organisations that can do precisely what David suggests, which is take the whole process through with either long-term funding raised from institutions or their own money. They become their own banks, they can do their own sort of shared ownership, staircasing up, down, in, out, whatever else. They don't need to be hamstrung by short-term money.
Thank you very much. I'm not being an expert in Dutch housing association consolidation. I'm going to go straight to David.
Yeah, well, I know more than is good for you about Dutch housing associations. It's not something you get friends with. The situation is a bit strange because we in the Dutch are the only people in the world who started off offering social housing as a universal benefit. Not many people know that, as Cocaine would have said. And so we ended up with a huge amount of it. Everybody else started up with the idea that social housing was only for the poorest in society, so they have not a lot of it. So what the Dutch did was they effectively forgave the various debts that the Dutch housing associations had, but the problem is they have a guarantee system at the state level, so they didn't change much at all, and they also tax Dutch housing associations. So we ended up in a situation where some of them got very big very fast. There were, well, scandals was the right word to describe it, involving people getting very, very big, very, very fast, losing the purpose they were there for. There is that danger, okay? I think that the solution is actually about creating a new class of organisation that are placed designers, managers and builders, and there could or could not be a housing association. It doesn't matter for me. Some of the smarter house builders are starting to think about this as well. They're starting to think about, well, what happens when the cycle acts against them, because they're only a cyclical play. When the environment, the economy starts to fail, they've got nowhere else to go. So the smarter ones are starting to work out they need a cyclical and a contra-cyclical play. And what's the contra-cyclical play? It's renting, place management, all the things we do. So I think in the next 5 years we'll see some significant structural change about people realising you need a cyclical and a contra-cyclical play. And people will start to realise that if you want market rent, you've got to take planning risk, because it'll never happen. So that's already starting to happen. These things aren't quick. So I think it's a really good point John raises, and I think it's bigger than the housing association question. It's about organisational structures and financial structures to deliver the supply chain of the sort of housing we need in the way we need it.
Yeah, and very briefly, on the Wolfson point about minimum standards.
Well, I mean, the Wolfson Prize was not about that level of granularity, frankly. What it was about was the economic challenge, and the winning entry posed the question, why is it we keep going on trips to to Germany and to Holland to see what they do, and we appear to be incapable of doing it here? Was the way that they dealt with the prize question, which is an excellent question. And the answer was the way we handle land. And they handle land in a much more interesting way. They have much more state involvement in it, but they're really, really interesting in the way that they handle what we would call greenbelt, because they understand that a deal can be done that would then release not only the quality of design, the size of the properties, because we are in Europe the producers of the smallest houses in Europe, and the reason is our land is so expensive, because you end up sourcing it at the end of a very complicated planning process. Whereas what they do is they start from the very beginning. They agree early on who's going to participate in the land upside, and the landholder may well get shares in a development company, which is another way of dealing with this issue, and not necessarily a capital position, so they can benefit from that uplift for many, many years. And we've got to come up with new ways of doing this, and from that will flow a whole series of standards and arrangements. Retirement housing alone will deal with a lot of those issues.
Chris, as our resident wonk, maybe you would be well placed to address this point about the sort of critical mass and what, because I thought it was a very interesting question about what, they're all very interesting questions, but I'm particularly taken with that one, but at what point do you have enough people to make it actually a viable, appealing settlement?
It's a good question. I'm afraid I don't know the answer, or at least not a precise number. Sorry. What is certainly true is that once you have a certain size of place, that you start to get really important economic agglomeration effects. That's where you've got lots of specialisms getting together, and you get positive, you know, economic growth as a result of the sharing of ideas and the fact that those ideas get put to good use. But I think as well, when we're thinking about new garden settlements, I don't think it does actually necessarily just have to be cities. I think we could also be actually talking about towns and villages. A number of people, a number of advocates have said, you know, garden cities can't get us the housing numbers we need. Well, they can't. If you think about Milton Keynes, even at the peak, I think about 3,000 houses were built by Milton Keynes, so it's a long way short. So that suggests that you either need a lot of garden cities to make an inroad into the number, or you need more garden, more smaller settlements as well. So I think to just sort of think about this in terms of, you know, what constitutes a city, I think we need to sort of broaden it out a little bit.
Richard, there's probably enough people in London, critical mass wise. Do you want to respond to any other features than that? You don't have to.
Well, I mean, just two quick comments. The first is, obviously there was the garden city thing is partly about, well, what's the jobs offer there, or is it a garden suburb, which, you know, this is not dissimilar debate than the one that we had at the beginning of the 20th century, and, you know, it's quite incredible the extent to which we are still building new suburbs in the capital. Barking Riverside is a joint venture between the GLA and a private house builder. It'll be the size of Windsor. 30,000 people will be living there. So that's, you know, but it doesn't have a job offer at scale there. It has lots of schools and 2 churches, but the presumption is that people will still commute to the central activity zone, to the centre of London to work. But that is a suburb at scale, and that's also part of the solution. I'll just very quickly pick up on this really fair point about demographics. And look, if you've got a number of single households now, both young and old, then how do you address that in terms of what you supply? And I think the challenge for us is, how do we ensure that our built stock is flexible enough to be adapted as our demographics and people's lifestyles change? By far, I said this at an earlier event, so some people have heard this already, but by far it's broadly accepted that the most successful typology, housing typology built, was the Georgian house, because you could adapt it in so many different ways. Sometimes it wouldn't even be housing, it would be turned into offices. And we kind of need to do that today. And actually, the GLA, since the GLA assumed funding powers, we've tried to do a few different things around housing. One of the things we've done is enter into a 10-year partnership with a medium-sized developer that specialises in building homes for single households or you know, possibly couples. They don't do family-sized housing. And one of the challenges we've been through with them is, in terms of pursuing that typology, how do they ensure that when someone else owns those homes in 30, 40 years' time, they can again be adapted? And so they've specifically changed their design. If you haven't heard, this organisation is called Pocket, so you know they had a very strong typology. They specifically changed their design to ensure that it can be converted into different sized units depending on what our population looks like in 2050 or 2070.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for speaking over the bizarre expectoration going on next door. I'm not quite sure what that is. Nigel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think this institutional money into PRS is a really interesting challenge for us, and we're very committed to making that happen at Legal & General. We're doing a very innovative project.
So I'm guessing PRS, private rented sector?
Private rented sector, yeah, because it's we're hugely short of that in the UK, and that's affordable housing for young people, but also for older people as well, and particularly in the one-bedroom type of accommodation, which is very, very flexible. In fact, one of the transactions we proposed is to keep things cheap and put the land in for nothing, because all the development uplift in land actually goes to the developer usually, and for certain schemes we don't want any of that. We want people to live in very affordable accommodation. And because we have many pockets of money, but we have lots of different types of liabilities. So what we're trying to do is match the cash flow from the assets we create with the liabilities that we have. And that's the primary focus of what we want to do. And that's the heart of slow money. We have 20, 30, 40, 50-year liabilities. So we're trying to match the cash flow from that. So we want a cash flow matching not a huge uplift in land values as a way of driving a better economy and a fairer society for everyone, particularly for those, lots of whom are vulnerable people. And sadly, there was a particularly vulnerable person, who seemed to be me, as it turned out. It was sort of a mid-50s greying man who's becoming very boring, which John and myself both found ourselves being in that particular demographic. But there's lots of parts of society and not properly dealt with by the current one. We are creating financial products and financial innovation with good partners who are on the panel with me to make these things happen in the UK. And it's only political will that's stopping us. It's not that we've got the modular construction products coming through to make these things cheap and affordable and in scale. We've got the capital and the money coming through. We've certainly got the resources in the country to create jobs around these things to make them happen.
Great, thanks very much. According to that clock up there, we've got time for another quick brace of questions. So let's do that. Yes, let's go to this gentleman here, and anyone else, and then let's have the gentleman there. And then I've got one. I'm going to abuse my position as chair, but yeah.
Robin Shepherd, Barton Wilmore. We were one of the finalists in the Wolfson Prize competition. And in that process, we identified 40 potential locations for garden cities.
Yeah, please don't list them all now.
I will not do that. A lot of those were cross-boundary, local authority boundaries. They were also serving a wider need than any one particular local authority. But the system we've currently got has stripped away any sub-regional planning or strategic planning. I'm not criticising that. All I'm saying is that there's a challenge then and a problem of actually delivering the scale. So there's two choices. We either have less and only identify garden cities where local authorities volunteer them, or we have some kind of sub-regional planning framework reintroduced.
Okay.
Which is better?
Great, thank you. And yes, gentleman behind you there.
Hi, it's John Walker from Gen 2. I was just picking up one or two of the points around new towns and garden cities. Just to finish off the set for Nigel, I think you mentioned Newton Aycliffe, Peterlee, was also Washington as the third. But they were complex delivery mechanisms, but they brought together scale infrastructure, land planning, funding. Is that the kind of vehicle, i.e. a development corporation, that is needed to bring scale to new housing supply?
Thank you. And my question, I'm going to brief anecdote. I was walking along Whitehall the other day, bumped into a senior advisor to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who, knowing that I'm a Guardian columnist, thought I might know something about Labour policy. Said, what do you think the big thing they're going to do at their conference is? And I said, I don't know. But one of the things they've been talking about is lifting the cap on local authority borrowing for housing, among other things, and infrastructure. To which the response I was given was, excellent, I really hope they do that, because if they do, we'll hammer them on borrowing. So I'd like you to know your thoughts on whether you think that is the right strategic judgment or not. Let's start down this end.
Which question would you like?
Whichever one you like. We haven't got time, so yeah, pick a mix.
I grew up in Newton Aycliffe, 19 Paulinus Road, in one of these new council houses that were built, and I felt very privileged to do that because my parents got a chance, I got a chance of being in those communities. And Peter Walker and Dennis Stevenson, Lord Stevenson is today. Dennis lived in a council house in Newton Aycliffe for the early part of his career, but they were people with real leadership who made those things happen, and they've worn well. I mean, Newton Aycliffe is still a reasonably attractive town, attracting foreign capital as we speak. Target was a new plant there. So I think there's financial techniques now which do away with the need for having local authorities borrow, because I think there's a huge, there's lots of public issues around that local authority borrowing happening. And I'd rather see the private sector get heavily involved because the money is available and make things happen.
Richard, you've got 1 minute.
Sure. Well, look, I mean, part of the purpose of the GLA is to ensure that there's cooperation across local authority, the 33 local authority boundaries in the capital. And that's coupled with opportunity area frameworks that give it a strong planning framework, whether it's within or outside or cross boundary. And it works. You can take that further. You can set up a UDC. We've seen those all over the place, but there is there is the potential to overcome any boundary difficulties.
Great, David. You've got 1 minute, but it's one borrowed minute, but interest rates are low.
Right, one quick one about the issue about are we better off with another iteration of planning policy, or are we better off with challenge? I think challenge. And I think the challenge has to be to civic leadership. What are you going to do to maintain the economy of your area for the next 20 years? Because if you don't know, why are you standing for election?
Okay. Oh, and in a word, local authorities capped to borrow?
Me?
Oh no, I was asking David actually.
Sorry?
Local authorities, normal caps to borrow?
None of the parties support that, from what I can gather.
Yeah, should they?
Big question, endless question about should we use European forms of borrowing? Because that's really the issue. Would it generate more investment? Yes. Has it been closed off by everybody? Yes.
Chris, final word.
No to lifting the cap on local authority borrowing, not least because we've got to keep a lid on public expenditure, and the deficit and controlling that is going to continue to be very important in the coming years. And also financing for housing is potentially out there, as we've already heard from the other panellists. The fundamental problem is the rational supply of land. That's what we need to deal with.
Great. We're out of time, so Richard Blakeway, Nigel Wilson, David Cowans, Chris Walker, the audience, Policy Exchange, Legal and General, Birmingham, thank you very much.